Hi everyone, welcome to our lesson on perception. So, as we go through this chapter, it's really all about how we make sense of the world around us through our vision, through our touch, taste, smell, basically how we take in data from the world, we organize it sort of like a computer organizes data, and then we come up with some conclusion or decision about what we see as truth. So over this presentation, we're going to be talking about the different types of influences of perception, as well as go through some examples through videos. I also have a version of this slideshow that does not include me in it if you want to go through it on your own, but here we go. So looking at this very first video, or I'm sorry, this very first slide, this might remind you of something that you did as a little kid. Do you remember playing the game Where's Waldo? So if you are familiar with Waldo, you probably know what to look for. I'll give you a second to see if you can find him. Did you find him yet? If you were looking closely, you might have found him in the top left section of the slide. He's standing next to a table full of shoes, and he is surrounded by shoppers. Now, when we think about what we look for with Waldo, we know that we're looking for a man in a red and white striped shirt, and he has a hat and he has glasses. So knowing that, anything that wouldn't already fit that basic piece of information, we would probably not even pay attention to. So I'm sure you wouldn't have first looked for the person selling vacuum cleaners or the person who is walking their dog. But now that you know that those are in this image, you're likely to look for them. All right, let's look at the next one. Now look at this. What's the very first thing you see? Is it two old people looking at each other? Is it two young people looking at each other? Is it a man playing a guitar? Is it a woman walking through a doorway? Do you see a chalice or goblet in the middle, or even some thorns at the top? If you said yes, then you saw all of it. And in fact, you might notice that you sometimes see the old people, you sometimes see the young people, you sometimes see the person in the background. It's all there, but it's all also not there. And this is something that happens in our brain where our brain is trying to fill in the missing pieces with information that we already have. So it's kind of playing tricks on us. And in fact, this is an image of two people through their life together. Let's look at another. Okay, so when we think about what perception essentially is where it's an arousal of our senses. Basically, we are taking in information typically through sight first. I mean, we think about our eyes are prominently displayed right here in the top part of our head. So our eyes and our nose and definitely our sense of touch. But whenever we bring information in, our brain is alerted to this information. And then we start to process it and we decide whether it's something we need to act on now or is it something we take more in. So think for instance, maybe like when you're listening to music. If you just have music on in the background while you're studying, you might not really be paying attention to the music itself, but if a song comes on that you really like, now you might be engaged, you're kind of like singing along, dancing along and stuff like that. So one type of perception can be really active where we're really engaging in it, or it can be something more passive. And fun fact, it has been proven that if you play like classical music or just instrumental music while you are studying, it actually helps to kind of engage both your logic and your creative side of your brain. It can help with long-term memory, but it's not recommended to play music that has lyrics with it because then you're concentrating on trying to like sing along rather than just have it be there for pleasant. Okay. Now you might be wondering, okay, what is this video here, these guys? Well, this is what we're going to think about in terms of a very important theory that goes along with perception, which is that human beings are creators. We create the world around us through what we want to be there, but also with what we think we see in the world. So there are many different theories about the existence of things. One kind of group of people believe that everything in the universe exists already in its complete and full form, and human beings are part of that existence, and we encounter it, and then we are kind of presented with the information of it. So for instance, like the universe is the universe and we are part of it, and so whether we are there or not, the universe is the universe. This theory that you see on screen, social construction of reality, is one that goes really well with what we think of in communication, which is we work with each other through our interpersonal interaction to name and create the world around us. And so as a result, we come up with our beliefs, our values, and our ideas of what is the truth. So you notice that the word truth is there twice. We have truth with a capital T, and we have truth with a lowercase t. So one thing to think about with social construction of reality is that we are always changing the world around us. We can just change the way we talk about something, and that changes whether we believe it to be true or false. Take, for instance, all the information that we're learning about coronavirus. It's coming out daily, so what was true yesterday might not be true today. That doesn't mean that what is true now will be false. It means that what is true now is a version of the truth, which is lowercase t. And that's where we live really pretty much 100% of our life is in the lowercase t. Unfortunately, we often think that what is a version of the truth is the only truth. And that is where we end up having disagreements, conflicts, wars, misinformation, conspiracies, and things like that. But we can turn back in time a long time ago to a very important person, Plato, who provided us with a really awesome explanation of what social construction of reality is. And this is in his great teaching of the allegory of the cave. So I'll let you take a moment to stop and watch that video, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so now that we have a file created, we have to decide whether this file is something that is new information. Does it go along with things that we already know, or is it something that we have to create new? And this is what we think of as simplifying. So simplifying is how we start to organize the information that we have now brought in through perception, and we start to see if it goes along with anything else that we already know. So one thing that happens is that we very quickly kind of come to a conclusion about whatever it is we're encountering. And you see this word here, stereotyping. Now, we often think of stereotyping as this is a negative thing and we should never ever do it. And you know what? When stereotypes become the only piece of information that we use to interpret something, then that is bad. But stereotyping is actually really an essential part of organizing information because it's based on quick assessment. But so we might say like, okay, I recognize that person, I recognize a uniform a person is wearing. So maybe I assume like, oh, like maybe, for instance, go to Target and people at Target wear red shirts and beige pants. So if you see a person wearing a red shirt and beige pants, you're probably really quickly going to be like, oh, that person works at Target. Now, you might be correct, but of course you might be incorrect because just looking at a person's outfit tells you really nothing more than what they're wearing. But that little piece of information does give you some predictability so that you have a likelihood of being correct of assuming that they work at Target. Unfortunately, stereotypes also serve to limit and to be used to perpetuate inaccurate information, especially when it's used against like large groups of people. So take a moment to watch this video about 5 Latino stereotypes in Hollywood then and now. And maybe just think for a moment, what other stereotypes can you recognize from media or even like especially now like current events? So take just a moment to watch that video. All right, great. Now let's think a little bit about how we start to determine like the interpretation of the information that we are perceiving. So there is actually a characteristic or kind of a way of thinking called punctuation. And this is where we sort of stop processing new details and we just kind of come to a conclusion like, oh, here we go. This is what is really going to happen, or I can already tell you what you're going to say, or here we've had this conversation before. I know. And it's basically where we stop processing details and we just decide like this is the conclusion. Punctuation often happens like when we have conflict, and it occurs when we kind of set up like a cycle of events in the same way over and over. So take a moment to watch this video. Basically, it's about if couples were to actually say what they mean when they're arguing. I will warn you that there are a couple little bad words in there, so if you're not comfortable with that, you don't have to watch the video, but it kind of shows how punctuation happens. We stop processing new information, which means that we're filtering out probably really important details because we think we know what the truth is. So take a moment just to watch that. Okay, so now let's think about how it is that we have, that we actually can now say, this is what I see, or this is what I experience, this is what I think, and this is what I believe. So as we start going through the now interpretation and statement of what we believe to be true, there are some things that we have to consider that influence our perceptions. So one has to do with just the ability to pay attention. So, think about it. If you're stressed out, if you're tired, you've got a lot going on, there's distracting things around you, maybe you don't understand the class, the topic itself, you don't have the context for it, it's really new and it's overwhelming. We just can't always pay attention to things. So we miss out on a lot when we are unable to give it our full attention and our full focus. But as we said, we can't always do that. It's impossible. Another thing to consider has to do with how we've come to create our own beliefs about the world, our own truths and capital truths and little t truths. So none of us are born having beliefs or values or knowing anything about the world. We get it all from other people. So when we consider that our parents, our communities, our friends, school, they all tell us what to believe, that's called indoctrination. That sounds like a really bad word, but it's essentially like we learn about the world by other people telling us this is what to think, this is what to believe, this is what to say, this is what to know, this is what to not believe in. And as we go through life, we have our own experiences, and those beliefs and those truths might turn out to be inaccurate, or we might change our mind about something. And that can be kind of traumatic, actually. In fact, it creates this thing called cognitive dissonance, where what we want to believe or what we thought was the truth might turn out to not be the truth at all. And now we have to come up with a new reality or a new understanding, kind of like we're all going through right now, right? Another thing has to do with, well, what do we want to believe? So definitely when you consider like all the memes that are coming out and lots of people on social media and on Twitter kind of being like, well, this is the truth about coronavirus, or this is the truth about the government. Unless you have firsthand knowledge, it's really opinion. It could be based in fear. It could be based on hearsay, but we choose to believe what feels right to us. And there's actually a psychological thought process called confirmation bias, where if we've already decided something to be true or not true, then we're going to seek out information that validates that. Take, for instance, believing in the supernatural. We've probably all had some kind of experience where something weird happened, or we felt kind of creeped out, or we had a dream of a loved one who passed away, or whatever. Whether you believe in spirits or you do not believe in spirits does not negate other people's beliefs about spirits. But here's a video about how we choose to believe in the things that we can't explain. So take a moment just to watch that. Did you catch it? Did you notice the changes that occurred in the video? Well, it's likely that the first time that you watched it, you didn't, because we typically assume that things are going to be good or bad. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have this process called confirmation bias, where we think that we see what we want to see, or we choose to not see things that we don't want to see. So first, let's talk about the halo horn effect. So halo and horn effect has to do with whether we think things are good or bad, and especially think of like people or places or experiences. I consider this like angry yelping. So we generally kind of categorize things as positive and negative. So if we've had an experience and it was a positive experience, then we're going to give it a little like halo, like a little angel. So we meet a person and they're nice and we get along well and we, they like what we like or whatever. Like, yeah, that's a pretty cool person. And we generally then think that everything about that person is good. If, however, we have a friend who's like, oh, that dude you just met, that girl you just met, no, they're horrible. Like, they're rude to me, they're whatever, they're a liar, that kind of thing. If our experience is that they were really good, it's going to be difficult for us to imagine them being bad. But the person who had the experience of them being bad will have given them devil horns. And so it's hard for that person to imagine that whoever we're talking about could ever be good. And so a lot of times this is why we will choose to stick around people who maybe aren't very good for us, because we want to see the good in them. And we'll talk more about that later in the semester when we talk about like conflict and stuff. In chapter 3, there was a little bit about gaslighting, and I definitely recommend that you go back and review that, because these are instances where we might choose to not see negative behavior because we want so very much to believe in the positive of something, which goes along with what I mentioned earlier about confirmation bias. So just take a moment to review some of that, and take some time to watch this video if you didn't already. Thank you. Okay, pretty funny, right? Okay, the other thing that we do is kind of like a snap judgment and the halo and horn effect, is that we tend to think that we know more about the reasons that people do things than we really do. And we tend to judge other people based on different criteria than we would judge ourselves, meaning that, say we're in a bad mood, we've had a rotten day, we're kind of like, just being grouchy or whatever, we would say to ourselves, like, I'm a good person, I'm a nice person, I'm just having a bad day. Because we know ourselves, right? But say we go back to our stranger that we mentioned earlier. This person comes off as being kind of rude, short-tempered, not very friendly. We might be like, oh my God, that person's such a jerk, and everything about them is just being a jerk. We would look at their behavior and judge them less favorably than we would ourselves. We're not likely to be like, oh, that person might be just having a bad day. And this is what we refer to as the fundamental attribution theory. So we think that a person is fundamentally, to their core, a certain way based on what we assess about their external behavior. So take a moment just to watch the video here on the left. Okay, so we already mentioned worldview. We have a few other things that also influence our perceptions. Other people. Other people can make us see or think or believe something because we trust them, especially those significant others or our friends, even people that we don't know, just like online, a person might have a similar idea to us, and so since we trust ourselves, we trust them. Other things that influence our perception would be our general culture, our mood, and sort of where we're at in the day, our gender, whether we identify as male or female, masculine or feminine, other things such as our sexual orientation, our race and ethnicity, our occupation, our age. All kinds of things influence our perceptions. And so remember how we talked about with culture, the idea of standpoint and standpoint theory. So we really don't understand somebody else's perspective unless we've experienced it ourselves. And I think one way to think about this is that, take it for instance, again, what we're going through now with the coronavirus. Some people might be thinking like, oh, this is nothing, it's just a flu, you get a little sick, you get over it, and then you're fine. Well, okay, if you're generally a healthy person and you aren't around anybody who isn't healthy, you're probably not that affected by it other than it's kind of inconvenient and it's really changed everything that we're doing and we have to sort of alter everything in our life, but it might not seem like it's a big deal. But if you are somebody who has like asthma or is overcoming an illness or has a weakened immune system, could be an older person or even like a little kid. It doesn't matter. Now, their perception of what's going on could be a lot different. They might feel like, hey, you're healthy, but I need you to stay healthy, so I stay healthy. So that's why we have to kind of keep in mind that our perceptions are ours, but we're trying to create a view and understanding and appreciation of the perceptions of others. So I ask you to think about this. How might any of these things on this list influence the way that we see things and how we might perceive it as being positive or negative? So take just a moment to kind of think about that. Okay, so now that we've talked a bit about worldview, about things that influence our perceptions, now we're going to do some of the important work, which is, yes, we can read about and recognize that we all see the world in our own way, but we are, as competent communicators, we want to recognize that our way isn't the only way. Sometimes we need to take in information from other people, and we don't always understand the same event in the same manner. And so we want to work toward developing skills to be able to determine whether the way that we're interpreting a situation is accurate or is at least confirmed with other people. So this is the idea of synchronizing our perceptions. So remember when we talked about in-groups and out-groups with culture? So one thing to consider is that our in-groups are more likely to validate and confirm the way that we see the world. Our out-groups will have different perceptions, and we are likely to not find their perceptions of things very valuable to us. And that's where I have to give you a little bit of pause and caution. Just because I believe something does not mean that what another person believes is inaccurate. It might be inaccurate, but it's still their belief. And in fact, my belief or my perception, my understanding of a situation could be the inaccurate one. So we have to take time now to practice communicating. So consider this. When we can think about stuff like how culture really, really influences the way that we perceive the world, it is very easy to get into the habit of ethnocentrism and xenophobia and stereotypical and ignorant types of behavior that we talked about with our culture unit. But there is also another theory called cultural relativism, which is one that it's been kind of questioned over the years, and there's some criticisms of it because it comes off as being kind of like, oh, everybody just get along and let's all just be friends. And, that's not always realistic, but it's really the idea that no culture or no perception has a higher validation than others, but there can be a larger amount of agreement about a particular perception. So we have to consider, like, especially when we're thinking about other cultures and we're interpreting how other cultures understand or act or do things, we have to frame it within the context of that culture and not our own. So this is what we refer to as cultural relativism. So I want to give you a moment to watch this next video on this slide. Okay. So a big part of developing stronger understanding or a more selfless type of perception is to develop empathy. And empathy is something that we're going to talk about kind of throughout the semester. But empathy is being able to see things the way that other people see them. So it means that we have to, sorry, my slide is going really slow. We have to try to take the perspective of another person. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with them. It doesn't mean that we have to change our own mind, but it means we have to try to see things or understand things the way another person does. We also might need to we have to practice being able to understand why a person feels the way that they feel, why they're expressing the emotion that they might be expressing. And we'll talk a lot about emotions in chapter 8 later on in the semester. But when we develop empathy, we also start to experience this thing called emotional contagion. So contagion means it spreads from one person to the next person. And I know we've all experienced this. Take, for instance, like just a person starts laughing for like no reason, and then we're laughing because we don't know why they're laughing, and now we're all laughing. And then here's a fun fact: laughter really is the best medicine when you're feeling down, when you're feeling sick. When we laugh, we take time to watch a funny movie, tell jokes, be with people we like. It creates those positive endorphins and helps us just to overall feel better, but also get healthier. And finally, empathy requires that we take time to really have care for other people. We don't ignore them. We don't tell them that how they see things is stupid or wrong. Again, it doesn't mean that we have to agree with everybody and just accept everybody's perceptions of things as being like, okay, that's you and this is me, and you and you do me. But empathy means like, I might not agree with you. I might not have had this experience, and I could myself be experiencing something completely different, but I respect that you see it that way, or you're feeling what you're feeling. And because you're my friend, or you're my family member, or you're my coworker, or whatever, I care about you, and I want to validate and respect the way that you see the world. So this video here of the man sitting on this cardboard, it does have subtitles in German, so you might want to ignore them. I can't take them off. It's a commercial, but it's a really good example of the importance of developing empathy to be able to see things the way other people see them. So please take a moment to watch that. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the importance of trying to take someone else's perspective and develop a little bit of empathy, we are now going to practice it. So there is a technique that we are going to be working on, and I will be giving you some activities in Canvas for you to be practicing your perception checking. So perception checking is where we are acknowledging our own reality. So consider this. We have a first order reality, which is what we visibly experience, and what we see, we hear, we touch, stuff like that. But our second order reality is how we interpret it. So for instance, we see someone like make a face. Maybe they go like, eh. We see them do this, eh. And one person might see that what that person is doing as sneezing, and another person might recognize it as they're snarling. So there's actually a clip for you to watch in an activity having to do with that here in our classroom. But first order is seeing it and acknowledging the facial expression, and second order reality is now the interpretation of it. So here's where we're going to have our perception check. We might have a stupid argument about whether a person is sneezing or snarling, and so basically we want to avoid doing that by being like, okay, this is how I saw it. Am I correct, or is there another possibility, and could you please explain? And so this is basically what perception checking is. So say we realize like, oh, hey, I texted my friend and I sent them a request to do a video chat, and I saw that they got it, but they didn't pick it up and they haven't gotten back to me. What's going on? So I might be like, hey, I reached out to you to see if you want to like do like a video chat since we can't hang out right now, and you didn't pick it up. I saw you saw it, but you didn't accept it. Okay, so that's describing just without any evaluation what it is that's happened in the situation, the behavior, the like scenario. But the very first step of perception checking is that we do not want to be judgy pants. We don't want to be like, hey, jerk, I sent you a video chat and I saw you got it, but you full on ignored me and you acted like you didn't get it. Because when we say something like that, we're making a lot of assumptions about the other person's behavior and reason for doing something. And it comes across as being super accusatory and that we have some superior knowledge about them, which is probably only going to be successful in making them mad. And then we're going to get mad and nothing good is going to come out of it. So the first step of perception checking is just say what happened without being judgy. I sent you a message to have a video chat. I saw that you got it, but you didn't pick it up. Okay, second step is you want to give two interpretations. So is it that you didn't want to talk to me, or were you busy with something else? So it could be they didn't want to talk to you. It could be that they were busy with something else. It could be anything, but you're just giving two legitimate possibilities, and now the person has the opportunity to respond. So I'm just curious why you didn't pick up my call. What's going on? Simple as that. Hey, I sent you a request to do a video chat. I saw you got it, but you didn't pick it up. Did you not want to talk to me at that time, or were you busy doing something else? Because I'm just curious, because I just was wondering why you didn't pick up the call. What's going on? So it sounds really easy, but in practice, it takes work. So we are going to spend some time. I'm going to have you in a discussion post do some practice perception checking with some scenarios. And the goal is that we do not want to come across as being judgy. All right, that's the hardest part. We don't want to make it sound like a person had an intent that we assumed that was their intent. We want to just let them be able to be like, this is what happened. And you know what? We might not like how they answer, but it's the answer. And then we'll talk about what to do with that further. So take a moment to watch this quick video about how to avoid arguments. So really in all of this, perception checking, taking perspective of others, developing empathy, there's some real benefits to it. When we feel good around other people and we feel good in our relationships, then it makes us feel good about ourselves. So we're going to have an increased self-esteem. Additionally, it helps us to be able to be comforting for other people, but also, especially in times like now where it's really stressful and there's a lot of uncertainty, we know we can develop the ability to allow ourselves to reach out to others when we need help or we need some support. And finally, empathy helps us to build trust. So we're not going to get into the habit of reading in between the lines and making assumptions about other people or the reason something happened or what the intent was or what was left out. We can start to try to practice patience, living with a little bit of ambiguity, like I might not know all the answers right now, but what I know is what I have. And being able to trust that the people around us are not trying to manipulate us or take advantage or keep us in the dark. We're less likely then to live in a state of fear and anxiety, because when we feel good about ourselves, when we know that we can support each other and other people support us, then we develop those emotional bonds of trust and commitment to somebody, and so we are more likely to have a stronger relationship with them. And in fact, human beings aren't the only ones that practice empathy. Just for fun, take a little moment to watch the video about the elephants. Okay, now it's not really difficult to practice empathy. It does take work, First thing is that we have to go into things with an open mind. We need to resist the temptation of thinking we know what's going on before we really know what's going on. We need to resist the temptation to not read something all the way through, or to listen to somebody fully and try to cut them off or shut them down. We need to try to be willing to question and reflect on our own beliefs and values and the ways that we see the world. Because just because we take time to understand somebody else's perspective doesn't mean that we are just wholly accepting it as, okay, it's the right way to think or it's the only way to think. But it's like, all right, I can see why you thought that or why you do think that. Okay. Second thing about empathy is that it leads to having a much better imagination. We're able to kind of maybe even see things from different angles. We come up with a lot better ways to problem solve. When we don't think that we have all the answers ourselves, we are open to be better critical thinkers and to maybe try new things. And finally, for empathy, it allows us to have commitment in our relationships. So being able to say to someone, I see you, I value you, I trust you, and I'm going to be here for you. So this was just a really simple overview of this chapter on perception. Obviously, you're going to need to read the chapter and look at it more thoroughly. I've also included a version of this PowerPoint that does not have me talking, so you can go through and watch the videos without me in it, because I know that with the recording, you have to go, it doesn't play in here. But make sure you do take time to watch those video clips, and please check to see what the assignments are that you need to do. All right, everyone, see you online.